My grandmother is the daughter of Japanese immigrants. In our culture, she is Nisei, second generation Japanese American. And when I visit her, she brings me to temple, our ancestors' spirits gathered inside like a galloping dust storm, their breath billowing above benches aligned in aisles like platoons of military barracks. When we chant, we recite in Japanese, a chorus of vocal cords trembling our native dialect in unison. When I was young, I did not care to learn the language I descend from. Traditional practice was something I never thought to continue. I never once thanked my grandmother for the effort she made in teaching me how to read and write where I come from. Never asked the translation of my Japanese name. When I was young, I did not care how history dislocated my lineage for practicing their Buddhist tradition. On February 19th, 1942, Executive Order 9066 authorized the incarceration of 120,000 American citizens of Japanese ancestry. My grandmother's family split apart as if their bodies were wood to be splintered like steam engine boats they traveled on to get here. Her father, a Buddhist priest, taught her to bow before an altar. Buddhist leaders were among the first to be imprisoned as if Pearl Harbor exploded from their prayer lines in their palms, palpitations propelling from their torsos like torpedoes. My grandmother was just another yellow-faced Jap, another kamikaze pilot holstered with explosives, threats of suicide campaigns, another enemy spy. War hysteria was just another euphemism for scapegoat, as if evacuation was meant for her own protection. But guard towers were not safe when Gooks and Orientals were lynched with barbed wire barricades at gunpoint. Every Sunday, she still attends morning service, glides her fingers against keys of an organ like a decomposing skeleton finding her flesh again. My grandmother never let her Buddhist tradition be constrained, even when caged in chain-linked fence. In our culture, I am Yonsei, fourth generation Japanese American. And when I asked my grandmother the translation of my Japanese name, she told me, "Your name, Susumu, has been used by armies to attack. It means move forward." Grandma, I'm sorry for ever feeling like I was too good to be Japanese. America has taught me to be less foreign, an unmarked atlas of where I am from, a Japanese accent pronounced like a small war in my mouth, conquered in English. I promise I will learn to read and write Japanese. Someday, I will thank you in our native language for never forgetting to move forward. All right, cool. Thank you so much. Cool, thank you so much. So through writing, right? I've learned how poetry can be used as a tool for healing, empowerment, and transformation. In its simplest form, poems are made up of two components. The first being creativity and imagination. This means using poetic tools such as simile, metaphor, and imagery to create vivid stories that people are more likely to relate to because they can hear, smell, and taste the actual moment as if they were there. The second component, and what I feel to be the most important part of a poem, is storytelling. What you have to say to the world, proving your existence to the universe, sharing who you are. I believe we're all powerful beings capable of love, understanding, and compassion, and storytelling is one way we illustrate this by building community and authentic relationships through poems. In doing so, we are able to learn from one another, and understand we are not alone in our experiences. We are able to create dialogue, have discussions, and ultimately spark positive change and action. This can be inspired by one poem. With that said, the process of writing can be very transcending. What I shared with you earlier was a poem dedicated to my grandmother for always holding on to our culture even through difficult times, and thanking her for the efforts she made in passing along our traditions. For this poem to be what it is today, it took me 2 years to write, most of that time being spent processing and understanding the intentions of what I was hoping to say. When I first began this poem, I wanted to share what I knew of my Japanese culture and family history. But after months of difficult writing and not feeling comfortable with what I was creating, I realized the poem that was calling me was less about what I knew of my culture and more about the disconnect I felt with it. So I took this process of writing as a time to reflect on my identity and what it meant to be of Japanese ancestry, but not from Japan, not comprehend the language, not know much about Japanese history, and not feeling very Japanese. Although this was upsetting to realize, it was also very healing. I gave myself intentional space to have a conversation with myself about feelings I've never once talked about out loud. For me, this was empowering. I was able to use descriptive language and vivid storytelling to unpack my exact thoughts and feelings so I could begin relearning what being Japanese American meant to me. And as a result, this helped me reclaim my identity as something not to be ashamed about. It was transformative. This was all possible because of one poem. And as I begin to wrap up, I'd like to end with another piece, this time about my relationship with poetry. Last year, I graduated from the University of Washington and was fortunate enough to be accepted into law school. However, during my application process, I sat down with the judge to get her feedback on my future plans. And in talking with her, I could see she didn't take me seriously because I wrote poetry. Upon reflection, I wrote this poem to remind myself that if I truly love something, in my heart of hearts, then I should make it a part of my life no matter what others believe, whether that's making a living from it or merely having it in my life because it gets me free. Poetry gets me free. So, I hope you all are able to find what liberates yourselves if you haven't already and hold on to it. Thank you so much for having me. I hope you enjoyed this last poem. Let's rock. In senior year of college, I sat down with a judge to discuss my interest in law school. Her office windows gorgeous in heights, glass carving the walls like prison bars. She asked me, "Troy, how old are you? What school do you go to? What year are you?" I told her I'm 19 and a senior at the University of Washington. She asked, "What do you like to do?" I said, "I enjoy poetry." She replied, "No, what are you interested in?" I told her, "I'm interested in poetry." She said, "Troy, you can't eat poetry. You can't make money with poetry. What do you actually like?" As if what she really meant to say sounded more like, "Troy, be realistic, be mature, grow up, stop being naive. Poetry will not make you a living. Get a real job. Your value is determined by how much salary you make in a year. Poems will pay you nothing." I settled into my seat quiet, as if being sentenced a verdict. Her advice felt less like consulting a lawyer and more like a courtroom. I wore my body like a trial, feeling guilty for wanting to write poetry. My chair, a witness stand to be talked interrogation to. I could smell the polygraph test in her questions. She couldn't believe the truth I found in poetry, did not want to understand how meaningful creative art is to me. After graduating college, I began my first poetry job at a transitional housing center for youth. Every week, I listen to poems about the shape of safety they cannot find, about being underestimated, discouraged, feeling like they are not good enough. I've listened to young people write themselves into existence, cold plastic pens held in their hands like gavels. They have taught me to never write pieces for a jury. I do not need to prove myself. Poems may never earn a disposable income, but whether I learn to write for a living or not, poetry will never be determined by the value of a paycheck. My narratives are not built for profits. I did not practice writing for years to produce poems like a factory. Poetry is liberation of myself onto paper. It is the place I've learned to share my own story. I have made homes here, found safety in knowing I belong. Poetry is writing myself into existence. No law degree can take this away from me. I remember why I am here with every poem I create. Right, thank you so much.